So the A-SPEC overview. We often cover addenda, and the purpose of that is to pick up items that were left off during the creation of the specifications that would make a difference to the specification. Typically, the kind of issues that we want to cover are things that are going to impact the delivery of the data. So if we've misspelt an attribute name, or we've misspelt a code, or we've missed out an attribute because of the creation of new tables, we want to cover those in addenda. And at the moment, there are no addenda. So what you have is the specifications that were delivered on the 31st of May. Code list normalization. This is an ongoing thing. And what we've done is we've openly promoted the availability for everybody to use codes. Now, you don't need to be, well, just whoever's typing there, could you please put yourself on mute? Be appreciated. Thank you. And hey, John, good to see you in. Could you put yourself on mute, please? Okay, so the code list normalization, the intent is that we create a national database of code so that anybody can come and look for a code. They don't have to be an A-SPEC client. And we're going to do crowdsourcing, different sectors, different agencies, whoever has a code. We'd like this to be a starting point, and to see what the consortium is using for codes. Code list access, as I mentioned, spreadsheet format, can be downloaded from the website. Gabby's going to talk about the API that we've developed so that you can receive your codes as a web service. And there'll be more of that in Gabby's section, Talking Tech with Gabby. Attribute normalization. We did a lot of work, as you may have noticed, in not just normalizing the names, but also normalizing the data types. So for example, code list attribute normalization, we created a data type of alphanumeric characters with a maximum of 10. There are some exceptions to that, but typically any code is no more than 10 characters. And this is an ongoing activity for us. Now, as constructed versus already constructed specifications. This is something new that came out of council saying to us, look, we can't use B-Spec because there are too many attributes in it, and it's far more than what the consultants need to capture. So what we did was we took B-Spec, and this applies to all of the specifications, and we customized them. So what you'll see on the left is the specification for existing assets, and on the right, the specification that you would have normally seen that have been developed along the way. So the major difference is that the existing assets document has some additional categories. They are both identical versions. So the existing asset document is based on the full version of B-Spec. However, we have 3 categories to define against each attribute, whether it's a core requirement, whether it's a required attribute but may need some more research, and look, and it may be that you don't find any further information, in which case you apply the default. And then there are optional fields. Yes, we finally have some optional fields for everybody that's been asking. And what it looks like is this. So this is the typical normal, what we call the normal B-Spec table, and it stops at the code list reference. So the difference is that we've now created this extra column where we have categorized each attribute, and you will find that with every table in A-SPEC. So that when you're looking to capture data or assets that are data about assets that are already existing, you can now look at this table, see what has been recommended as being the core attributes, the required but may need more research attributes, and the optional attributes. Access to the A-SPEC reference material. For many of you, you're quite familiar with this. If you have, for consultants, if you have colleagues that want to find out about the reference material, if you're a council or water authority that have consultants that want to find out about the reference material, or you want to get access to it, the first action is to click on the contact menu item on the A-SPEC website, complete the form, and put in your request. We ask that all consultants complete this, and we get into contact with them and ask them to complete a non-disclosure agreement. And where we have consultants that are providing data to A-SPEC members on a regular basis, we are now providing them all with an access. Otherwise, we'll send the relevant data to them that they need, the relevant documents. And the documents cover PDF, spreadsheets, sample files, addenda, and code lists. And look, if you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask. Issues and their resolution. We've been working on a ticketing system for support requests. We've put that on hold as we're now researching other systems to track requests. The intention is that we create a system that's easy to use and intuitive. And at the moment, we are we've got that on hold until we can find some other means to do this kind of testing. However, so if you have an inquiry, please send through the info@GISA email. Otherwise, individuals that have already been included in the beta testing, just continue to use that to send through your inquiry. We'd appreciate it. Actions arising from previous A-SPEC forums. We keep track of what are the key actions that come out of these forums so that we can report on them and to see our effectiveness in addressing them and whether they're still outstanding. The ones that are listed there are ongoing, and so for example, the top one, frequently asked questions and practice notes. That's a work in progress. The intention is that we create those on the website, so there's no sunset clause on those. That is ongoing. As well as the request for consultants and authorities to provide photos. We love our photos, and our intention is that all our codes and all our examples will have photos that represent what's there on the ground, and we provide an interpretation of how to capture it and provide it and incorporate it into your information systems, or if you're a consultant, provide that. The other thing that of note, the other point of note is that B-Spec around investigating BIM enablement of A-SPEC requirements. I will talk a little bit about what we've done previously, and I think Gabby may have something that he's going to talk about in his technology presentation as well. But that's an ongoing process for us, and anyone interested in talking a little bit about how there is an impact to them or an interest to them, please don't hesitate to let us know. Okay, so this is our stakeholder community as it currently stands. And we've had quite a bit of growth over the last 6 months. The largest organisation that has joined our consortia, or our community, is a government department in Western Australia, the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. It's really great. You know, we really appreciate them coming on board, and for the consultants that are working in WA that are on this call, whilst they may not be a B-Spec user, they are a D-Spec user, and we'll talk more about that on the D-Spec forum. So I'm not going to tell you now, so that you can come on to D-Spec and find out what they're doing. Okay, so that's the end of our first session. We've got a couple of minutes for anyone that may have a question. If not, I'll continue on. So feel free to take yourself off mute, or put a question in chat box about anything that I've covered so far. Okay, we'll continue on. And look, and if something comes up, hi Trevor, I see your question. I know that, so the short answer is yes. The intention of the code lists is to minimize the amount of free text entry so that we can have some quality control around the entries. If that answers your, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but please don't hesitate to do a follow-up during this session, this next session. Just briefly, did that answer your question? Not quite. Okay. So are you talking about not having an excessive number of code lists? All right. So look, I can't tell you how many code lists we're going to have, but when we're at this stage, we think that we have created the appropriate number of code lists, and we don't expect expanding any further than that. If there are particular attribute fields that all of a sudden we find have generic entries, then we would convert that to a code list. Okay, great. All right, so this next session, which will be going until 11:15, is we're going to cover those things, some clarifications, expansions of asset types, future-proofing, what does that actually look like, areas that are working or not working, you know, and the issues requested for discussion. So one of the things that we've discovered in our conversations with B-Spec for the users that are now incorporating them into their asset management system is that we have a number of attributes that are aggregated onto a particular asset type. So for example, a building space. We have details about the ceiling, about the floors, about the walls. It's now been suggested to us that we look at breaking those out into their own elements. So the way that we'll address whether that will occur is that we'll canvass our users of B-Spec and gauge their interest in having that expansion. And if it is, then we'll look at a program to incorporate them and a timeline of when they would be incorporated. We're always open to other suggestions, whether we have enough attributes or sometimes too many attributes. I know that that's a common question. So always open to having that conversation and seeing what's of interest and importance. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through a proposed new attribute, and this is something that we covered off in our March forum in WA. One of the things that occurred from going into aggregating all of the common attributes onto the area of works polygon is that when there are complex projects and there are multiple projects provided and assets going across boundaries of these polygons, it's actually difficult to identify what assets are in which project or stage of works. I'll cover that off in a moment about multiple specs. So the intention is that we create one additional attribute that will sit in every table that will link those assets to the area of works identifier. And that way, our end users will not require the polygon to be able to link all of those common attributes to their assets. They can refer back to the area of works identifier. I hope I made that clear. If not, don't hesitate to make a comment. Now you'll see that note that I've got there. If multiple specs are delivered under the one project, then you only need to provide one area of works extent file. That is correct. So typically in a subdivision stage, where we'll have roads open, potentially open space, certainly stormwater drainage, there isn't the requirement. You don't need to provide an area of works identifier for roads and then an area of works identifier for stormwater drainage. You can now create the one area of works identifier, the one polygon, and submit that as part of your data submission. That will actually minimize the amount of time and effort that it's going to take to validate those data sets. So here's what we've proposed and created for other clients within their own information systems. For subdivisions, concatenate the subname and the stage name, a stage number, and the date of construction. That will create the area of works identifier. That in itself will be a unique identifier. You will not get a duplication of that. And as you can see, the note about the date format, to make it easier to provide that date as part of the area of works identifier. So Brian, are you asking about the area of works identifier, a picture about that? Yep. Okay. I do have a diagram, but I don't have one handy. Maybe Gabby, if you could prepare that as part of your talk when we go to your technology section, just to cover that off, I'd appreciate that. And we'll cover it off for you there, Brian, so you can get a sense of what's going to be shown. For capital works, it'll be the project name, if there is a project name, the project number, if there is a project number, and the date of construction. So however that capital works project is identified, that will be used as the area of works identifier. So essentially the attribute will be called, oh, I haven't put that there, that's a bit remiss of me. The attribute will be called AOW underscore ID. And it will have potentially a alphanumeric field, and it will have 25 to 30 characters. We don't want to make it excessive, but that's what we've provided to other clients so that they can link their area of works common attributes to specific assets within their data sets. Okay, future proofing. Like I said at the start, what does this actually mean and what will it take? I think for me, that's been the key question. What will it take? So if we look at this diagram, yes, the world has embraced digital twins. It has embraced digital engineering. There's a focus on big data through sensors and what sensor networks will provide and healthy communities. So the position at GISA is that we've always replicated the physical world, which is the real world, as a digital twin. I just wish I had thought of that name back in 2002 when we first started this. I may have been able to patent it and get 10 cents for every time that term has been mentioned. But in all seriousness, our expectation is that the physical world isn't just about the data. It's about all of the relationships around descriptions and entity relationships and business processes so that the asset owners can create the decisions that they need, evidence-based decisions, to create a healthy community. And it all starts with data. So some work that we did in New Zealand a few years ago was to look at how Revit could be used to deliver B-Spec data. So there's Revit, quite a complex product and data rich. And as you can see from that particular diagram, you get a real sense of where everything is. What we're highlighting there is a duct. And in this particular exercise, the council wanted to make sure that all the attributes that they needed about that duct from an asset management perspective were actually provided as part of a schedule. So on the left, you see the B-Spec prefix, and they were a part of the attributes that were being collected to deliver to the asset owner so they could incorporate that into their asset management system. The beauty of doing this particular exercise was that once they exported the data, it came out into a SQL extract. So they had the whole schedule about their ducts and whole schedules about all of their other assets. Now, once they got it to this form, they were able to create an asset identifier within their asset management system. They linked it back to that duct within the Revit environment, and straight away they had an environment where their asset management system was linked to the 3D model. So if they wanted to find out more information about this particular duct, they had that integration between asset management and the 3D model. Now, it just happened that we did this in Revit, but there are other products out there that you can do the same. The key thing here is to create these schedules, to identify what is required and provide that as an extract so it can be incorporated into other information systems. And I think Gabby's going to talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, recommendation for future submissions, data formats. And this is part of future proofing as well. The research that we've done has identified that GeoPackage is now the preferred OGC standard for data exchange, the Open Geospatial Consortium. And we've trialled this with data submissions that we've made for consultants to councils, and it's been quite effective. And as you can see, the advantages there are really great. And we've found that it holds the integrity of the data really well, and we can package something up and give it to a client, and they can very easily incorporate that. So for example, we've been using QGIS quite a lot, and when you can create a GeoPackage out of that by identifying what files you want to incorporate to it, when you deliver that GeoPackage to your client, they just grab the GeoPackage, bring it into their system, and it automatically unbundles the different data sets that are part of that package. And then you can do what you want to do with it from there. And the other thing is we don't have naming length limitations. It's a database format, so you can create automatic scripting, and feel free to ask Gabby about that, because that'll be part of his conversation as well. Esri shapefiles are still acceptable. MIF-MID files are still acceptable. It's older technology. Esri shapefiles are no longer supported. So if that's your preferred method, sure, no problem. But we strongly recommend that you have a look at delivering to a GeoPackage, and whether you're the software vendor who provides you your tools has the capability to deliver to a GeoPackage. So a heads up for future discussion, again around future proofing. We've had quite a few questions from consultants about accuracy and precision for capture of assets. And it's interesting because when we do the presentations to our technical briefings for our clients, this is probably the main topic that comes up, of course, after who's going to pay for it. And that's something that we don't answer. We leave that up to the client to address. And if you think that that's a classic AFL rules handball, yes, it is. We're not in a position to be able to answer that question. So the intention is that we're looking at adding a level of accuracy and precision for capture of assets. So at the moment, there's no prescribed accuracy and precision requirements. We assume that as professionals in the measurement space, there is an implied knowledge about what's acceptable for requirements. And if you're doing water and sewer capture, for example, then you've got the WASA standards, which identify specific tolerances. What I will do is in my wrap-up, I will show you what that table will look like, so you can get a sense of the kind of conversation that we're now creating. So we propose to include this as an appendix to the A-SPEC document, and we will distribute a draft following these forums for review and comment. And we're really interested in comments, particularly from our surveying consultants. Any questions about that? Okay. So I'm going to go through now a number of issues that have been raised. So some of the people who are on here from WA would have seen these in March, but so I've included them in this forum so that we can essentially do a recap of what the conversation was. This is a common issue that's raised. In this instance, we're talking about, okay, public toilets in open space or a road reserve. If you're asked to capture public toilets in open space or road reserve, and the public toilets sit in the B-Spec document, then what do? We assert that the first thing is that you speak to the client, find out what their expectation is. And we've created a new checklist. It's in draft at the moment, but available for people to use and to refine so that it becomes part of the job, part of the scoping job. There's quite a few consultants that I talk to have created similar checklists and in more detail, so they ask for specific information. But this gives you a sense that at the high level, when you're talking about a developer job or you're talking about a capital project, the asset owner can use this to identify what assets are actually going to be delivered. And then you have a conversation with the developer to make sure that they actually understand it and sign off on it. And we intend for this also to be included as an appendix in the overall A-SPEC document and to be used as part of the practical completion checklist prior to handover. Case sensitivity, data lengths. We were asked recently why we need it. George, I can prove to you that everything that I've done is fine. Why do we need to provide a specific text field with certain characters? Why do I need to provide you a decimal field with specific number of points, specific number of decimals after the point? Look, it's from our perspective, it's a straightforward answer. This ensures the data integrity and compliance. Yes, we want you to be responsible for the compliance of the data. And we're not saying that you're not responsible, but by adopting what is in the specification, it clearly indicates that you have taken into account what the compliance requirements are. So in this particular example, which is the attribute fields under the area of work extent polygon, yes, the naming convention is correct with the upper and lower case and the underscores. However, everything has just gone to a default format of text string 254 characters. This is not compliant. When we check on behalf of our clients, we return this, and we also have a conversation with the consultant to find out, well, do you have a mechanism in place to address this? Is there some way that we can support you to make sure that you get that spot on so that the permit name, the subname, and all of the other attributes have the correct data types there. How precise do we want to be with linear elements and matching to other elements? Well, we are working with systems that are precise. It is important, and this promotes confidence and certainty around knowledge of data integrity. Data integrity isn't just about, oh, I've got the right code in there. Data integrity also is about interpreting that what you saw in the field has actually been translated. So, for example, if we had line elements and we used a buffer around them to create the shape that we need, you can see those overlapping elements that are highlighted in the darker shade. That's what we end up with. That creates data issues for analysis down the track. The intention of being precise with your linear elements, whether it's your polyline or your polygon, is to make sure that the end user gets certainty that their data that they're receiving has met the compliance of the A-SPEC requirement. And then their focus is on some higher level quality assurance. Common question, and this applies to all the specs. We haven't determined when this would be, but it's quite possible that it could be May 2021. And why have I got unless there? It's because if we find something in the specs that just doesn't work and is impacting the deliverable, then we will resolve that. And that's when you're likely to see an addendum. At the moment, we've done a number of minor changes, typically the typos or a change in description. We don't see that as having a requirement to provide an update, because whether our grammar is incorrect or we have a spelling mistake in the description, it's not going to have a major impact on the deliverable. However, if the spelling mistakes or errors and omissions occurred in the attributes or in the data types, then we would create an addendum, distribute it, and so that everybody knew what was there. And each time people would download the version of the document that they wanted, they would also see that there are addendums there. A typical example that we found was in the code lists, we have the C comment description. And we've seen a number of we tied it up a lot for the May 31 release, but we've seen a number of instances where the C comment description just didn't match up with the table name. And so we're tidying those up as well. So if the table name was called material, the C comment description is please populate C comment into the attribute field, and where there's a new material, populate it into the comment field. It'll be along those lines. So we want to make sure that the table name and what's in the description match up. I'll also show you an example of that in the wrap-up, as I think that's a key thing so that people are not alarmed at the fact that we haven't got that lined up. But I can see that it'll be a concern if we're talking about having whole and complete work that we're doing. And here's another example. We use the examples in the sample data and spreadsheets to set up our data structures, but they're different to the examples in the PDF documents. Yes, we did notice that we spent so much time updating our PDF documents that we didn't actually modify the correct example. And look, we really apologise for the inconvenience for that. We think we've now picked up all of those, and we will provide some updated spreadsheets that show the correct example that matches with the code list. So where people have raised it with us, we've had that conversation, and we will continue to monitor to make sure that we've resolved those examples. Okay, the footprint raised recently at the WA forum. Footprint of a building in survey terms does not include eaves and other elevated features. Yes, we get that. So what we want, what we outlined there was in the context of B-Spec, we want to show the full extent of the footprint, which includes eaves and other features. You know, if it's a balcony, if it's on a particular floor, there's an external balcony, we want that provided as part of that floor plan. Just the same if it was a single story building, we would want, if there was on the eaves, we would want the footprint to be shown to the extent of the eaves. If there's a balcony, if there's a veranda, we would want the footprint to be shown to the extent of the veranda. So the suggestion came in, do we use the term envelope, as that appears to be more appropriate? So happy for people to make a comment or just type in their chat box what yes, no, need to think about it, or whatever their comment might be. So this is something that we now raising as a change with the name of a table. I'll move on, but keep chatting as you like. Again, another request. The attribute floor underscore elevation to be renamed because it's misleading. And the request is that it be renamed to floor height to reflect the height from the ground level. And that's what the recommendation is. When we look at the attribute, it has a height value. It doesn't have a reduced level value to AHD. So what we're recommending and supporting is that the floor underscore elevation attribute be changed to floor underscore HT to reflect that it's a height from ground level, not a reduced level. Again, if you are in agreement with this, say yes and then dash floor underscore HT after it so we know what you're saying yes to. So for people who aren't familiar with this particular term, external floor area. It was raised that the definition's unclear. Is this outside? It's not actual usable floor area. we're not saying whether it's usable floor area. What we're saying is it's external floor area. So there could be a balcony there that may be closed off, but it's still external floor area. Whether it's usable or not is up to whether it's usable or not is up to the client to determine. What we contend with is that like I said, it refers to a balcony, and it's up to the owner to determine if it's usable or not. You'll notice that in our area of work extent, we have a source field, and then we have a source field in each table. Why do we have that? Well, one of the clarifying notes is that in the area of work extent, if the source field is different for each of the asset tables that you're creating, then you populate in that asset table what the source is of that asset. If it's common across the whole project, then just populate it in the area of work extent boundary, and the source field in the table remains as a default value. The area of work extent boundary is not as constructed information. That's correct. So we're not defining the source of the area of work extent boundary. We're defining the source of the assets of the project or subdivision within the area of work extent boundary. So it's not the as constructed or the work as executed information. It is about the assets that are within that boundary. A good question around photo referencing. So we've recently, in this instance, the surveyor has recently carried out a survey of the job. They've taken a photo. Do they attach the image or reference an external image? The intention of that field is if there's only one image, then you record the name of the image so that when you're providing all the images to the client, then they know which image links to which asset. And you may preface the image name with the asset ID, for example, as a way of recording that. Another question that we've before I go on to that, in fact, what you could do is you could provide a schedule that lists all the images of the various assets for that job, as long as that schedule is clear enough so that the client knows which images are for which assets. Now, I would suggest that you clarify that with the client that that's what you're going to do. It is in the table that's a requirement as part of the validation. So it's important that that gets covered off. Now, one thing, excuse me, one thing I wanted to raise was we had a recent question about an asset, not with buildings, but for curbs. So I want to give you this as an example, and then you can see how you can apply it to the building side of it. If you've got a curb that might go for 100 metres, how many photographs do you need? We assert that you only need one photo per profile in a location that represents the profile of that particular asset at that point. If the profile changes, then add another photograph to represent the new profile. So the intention of the photographs is to provide on linear objects. So if we're talking about ducts in a building or cables and conduits, you really only need to provide a photo to show what the object is, so that the client has a record of what they can find when they are looking to inspect or repair that particular asset type. Another request, please use terms that are already in use instead of inventing or borrowing inapplicable ones. Not much we can say to that, but noted, we understand. If at any time you find that we are not using an appropriate term in B-Spec, then please do not hesitate to let us know. We will clarify it as soon as possible and issue an addendum to note that. Why change from N/A to NA? Yeah, really good question. They both mean the same thing. Yes, exactly. However, what we're finding, and my business partner Gabby goes to great lengths to explain to me, because I'm not a DB person, is that there are a lot of terms that we have that we're using that actually create conflicts when data is being ingested into different databases. So wherever we identify that that's having a specific impact, then we will clean that up. Yes, we've created a few messes by the look of it. However, we will address as appropriate. A good question, and I know the person who raised this is on this call, so I won't mention his name. Oops, gave it away. It's a male. That cuts it down to a number of people then. So in the B-Spec manual we have a column for male or female fixtures. Really good question. What happens if it's a unisex public toilet? Well, there's no point in adding an extra column. We're going to modify that attribute field, so now you can include unisex. So so going back to your question, Trevor, about the number of code lists that we create. We can create this as a code list, or it can be an entry of M for male, F for female, or U for unisex. It's either way, it will have some specific values that will be acceptable. Do you have a suggestion for classifying buildings? We're aware that there are a number of classifications out there for buildings. IPWEA Building Practice Note, for example, has building classifications. There's also the Australian Building Code. We're also aware that a number of councils have created their own classification based on the use of the building and value of the building. So So we have received a document from Busselton with examples of what they've classified their buildings, with a small description about their types of buildings. So if you would like to have a look at that, please contact us through info@GISA, and be happy to forward it to you for your review. We have permission from Busselton to be able to do that. A really topical point. We don't get information from the consultants. So this comment has come to us from a surveyor who doesn't get information from their engineering consultants or their contractors. So we don't get it, so we need the NA value. I'm going to talk about the GISA position, which encompasses this NA value. When an asset is built, there is a value for it. If the asset is already existing, you may not be able to find a value for it. Therefore, NA or unknown is applicable. For new assets, NA is not a valid entry. And our position, based on our experience, is that unknown or not applicable is not valid for a new asset. There are instances where the field may be a conditional field, where it's not applicable, and we're continuing to go through all our documents to make sure that we don't create confusion around that by putting NA in an area that is not relevant. So our advice to councils and to the consultants who are providing the submissions is that if you're going to provide values of unknown and not applicable, it will be non-compliant. I understand that it creates a bigger issue around, well, how much time do I need to spend to chase up data from consultants? And historically, they just don't give it to us. And so what we want to address is that communication right from the very start, right from when you get a request to provide the data to be A-SPEC compliant. I'm aware that there are a number of consultants who have their checklists, as I mentioned before, and they request information from their consultant. It is critically important that if you are asked to provide that data, and if you're a surveyor going out to do some asset pickup, don't put your PI on the line by providing data that you have not seen as verified. Don't provide data about a wall material if you haven't seen the wall be erected. Don't provide data about a roof structure if you haven't seen the roof be erected. Go to the authoritative source, whether it's the contractor or the supervising engineer or architect on the job, and get that information from them. File naming conventions. So we want to communicate this to you. Each table 1.3 of each specification has a universal file naming convention. We request that you adhere to that. And you could put the unique, the area of work ID as a prefix to, say, footprint, or a prefix to building space, if that's the table. That way you can keep it all packaged together under that particular job. I've seen a lot of consultants that use the file naming convention correctly, and I've seen consultants who don't. We request that you follow the file naming convention. And again, with submissions, and excuse me for my typo, area of word identifier, area of work identifier. It's meant to be in the zip file name. And include the certification form, which you can find in each specification. You can also find in the A-SPEC document. What's the purpose of the certification form? The purpose is that you have recorded the information about that particular project as a summary. The certification form also confirms who has collated the information. It also provides you with the opportunity that if you were the company or individual collating this information and you also sourced some information from another consultant or a contractor, you can put that into the certification form. That all forms part of the governance process for the handover. Work that we are doing at the moment with councils and water authorities is on their asset and asset data handover processes. It's not a singular approach. Here's the data, off you go. No, well, who verifies that what has actually been provided has actually been built in the location that's been specified? That is the intent of A-SPEC. If we're going to create a certified and authorized digital twin, then we're relying on individuals and organizations to certify that what they've provided actually exists. Okay, any questions, comments, topics that I haven't covered, so that we've got 9 to 10 minutes that we can cover off on other things? Okay, a comment raised around accuracies, and I think it's a really valid comment and we need to think it through. So the comment is, for the internals of the building, these items cannot be surveyed easily, short of doing a laser scan of the internals. Previously, all information has been extracted from the design, DWGs and PDFs. What exactly are they requiring? Okay, so in terms of the accuracies, it'll be around the, I get the point about the practicality of doing it, and I'm going to take that on board and have a further conversation with the person that made that comment, and also with the owners with the users of B-Spec, and to get their sense of how important it is for them to know where things are. It may be a moot point in terms of positional accuracies and precision for B-Spec, particularly with the advent of Revit models. The Revit models, or the 3D CAD models, are likely to provide that level of accuracy and precision. So, so that's my position on that particular point. Is anyone, Gabby?
George,
Yes.
there is a comment and perhaps a good question from John Cleverden.
Yep.
Source in area extent, if it varies between individual tables,
Yes.
I would normally use refer. Maybe you can comment on that.
If that's the appropriate entry, then that's correct. But if it's not the appropriate entry, then you need to see the appropriate entry. Does that make sense?
What do you do if it differs between individual tables? So the source for one table within the project is a survey,
Yep.
and for another is maybe design drawings. What should he put into that field then?
Okay, so I've just got. I'll just bring this document up on our screen so we can have a look at it. So the source entry is a conditional entry. And so if it's common in the area of work extent polygon, if across the whole project, the capture is the same, the source is the same, field capture, whatever, as constructed drawings, whatever it might be, then you just populate the area of work extent. So when we go to the area of work extent polygon, if the source of all the data is the same, then only populate this table. So it's only this table that needs to be populated based on the source of all the data being the same. If it's not, then I can see that we need to put a further validation rule in here to refer to the table. So I think John's comment is correct in referring to the particular table. So we will make a note of modifying the validation rule.
Yeah, George, just to give an example here, it's more applicable to A-SPEC or A-SPEC in particular. Things like maybe signs and fire hydrants and light poles will be picked up by the field crews, so that'd come under, I guess, the COM2. But other things like line marking often isn't done until after the PC date, and sometimes things like speed humps as well, so that'd go in as DES Plan C.
Yep, understand. So in building terms, it could be things like the signs on a building. Okay, whereas it'll be that whether they're in the hallways, whether they're on a door, whether on the external sign, you may you're not necessarily going to do field survey, but it'll be picked up by a field crew. Whereas if there's a standpipe outside of a building that's going to be used for a hydrant by the fire brigade, that may be picked up by field capture. So they're the two. There's a couple of instances that I see relevant to B-Spec, but in essence, what you're suggesting, John, is appropriate. That you need to look at the assets that you're capturing, what the source is, and record that. Any other comments around that? Are you okay with that, John?
Yeah, I am. Yep.
Great. Anything else, Gabby, that we need to pick up? We've got a couple more minutes.
No, nothing else, John. Sorry, John. George, that was raised.
That's my middle name anyway. So, yes. So you've got a couple of minutes before the next session starts. We're staying online. If you want to duck away and get a cup of tea, do at your own peril, because Gabby's sessions are usually pretty good when it comes to the technology side of it. Yep. A couple of other items that have been raised is around PDFs. Do we still need to provide PDFs, was a question that was asked of me yesterday. And so we've got to look at the intent of the PDF. One of the issues that we're having, that we're experiencing, is that there's a concern about the data that's provided actually reflects what's been built, and it's not just the design plan stamped. So the intention of providing a PDF, and that's a requirement that is specified by each asset owner, whether they require it or not. But in my experience, a PDF has been required to show where those changes are as a way to document what those variations are, so that when you're getting the actual data, the machine readable B-Spec data, you can see that that change is reflected in the data. That's the primary example that I have seen around the provision of PDFs. Sorry, that's one of the primary examples. The other primary example is that if you're providing, if you're not just doing the building, but there's other works on that particular site that you're doing, then the PDF is likely to cover all of the other assets. So, for example, there are very few buildings that I know that don't have toilets or running water. So, the location of, the stormwater pipes, the location of the sewer main or the sewer connection for the property, the location of the water connection for that property, they may not be part of the asset data provided, so the PDF will show the overall extent of the works for that particular project. Okay, so we can cover off some more things at a later time, but now I want to hand over to you, Gabby, and I'm going to make you, as soon as I can find you on, this is good, this is in alphabetical order.
George, I'm before you. Well, on my screen, I'm before you. Don't know why.
Yeah, on your screen. Yeah, that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, make presenter. Have you got that now, Gabby?
Yep.
Great.
Can you see my screen, George?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
Busy bees.
Busy bees. Rightio. George mentioned earlier on that we were talking about code lists for everyone, and George has obviously explained what he means by that. So everybody needs code lists, and most systems will have their own, and very often there'll be different sources of truth for those code lists, which in this kind of environment can become quite confusing and difficult. Because it actually creates confusion for people. Right, I feel like I hear a little bit of an echo. Anyway, so the maintenance process of code lists in terms of the A-SPEC environment is that mechanisms to capture the new codes is given, via the description field. So if you find a new code in the field and you can't use that code, or it's a code that's not available that you need to use, then there is this description field that George has mentioned before several times. There's a discussion on how to use it, and then it's rolled out, and that may take a bit of time before that's actually available. So sorry, and then one last thing about that is that it then becomes available as a download on the A-SPEC website, and then you people will be able to incorporate that into your organizational system. So there's a bit of a lag, is the point I'm trying to make here. There's a bit of a lag before those codes are actually available and can be used by people and validated. So let's talk about the code list API. This is something that we've developed. It's a web service. The maintenance process for that is that we're able to edit these online. So once everybody's agreed to what needs to go into the code list, or what changes needs to happen on the code list, then it becomes an available resource online. Access options for that is that you can still download from the A-SPEC website and then incorporate into your system. You can search and download from the online web service, or you can link to an API. And at this point, what I'd like to do is I want to take and show you the code list. Can you still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So here's the online version of that web service. And so if you were interested, if you were interested in knowing a little bit more about those codes or working with the codes practically, then there is a way in which we can, I just want to show you how you can use that. So that's the first question is, if you wanted to know a list of B-Spec codes for asset status, I'm just going to go and say B over there, and then type, I can type status if you like, and there's a list of all the B-Spec asset status codes in relation to B-Spec's asset status. So let's just look at another one. I'm going to just kill those. If you wanted to know, if you have a code, and for instance, maybe you have something called INDF. What is that? Oh, okay. INDF is a code that's used in B-Spec as a foundation type, or in A-SPEC as a retaining wall foundation type. So they're both foundation types, and same code used for both of those. If you wanted to know where do we have concrete? I have some concrete, and I'm not totally sure what to use. Now, give me everything that contains something to do with concrete. And there's a list, and you can see there's quite a long list of codes that include concrete. If I want to know for buildings, then I can go and filter that some more, and there's all those codes. Now, and then I can obviously go and make a decision as to which is the appropriate one I wanted to use. I'm just going to kill that. And the last example is, let's say I wanted to have all the codes for head and end walls. And I go and I type head and end walls. So there's the list. Now, the other thing I haven't spoken about, but on this, you are able to now go and download as a PDF, download as a CSV, or you can just copy it and paste it somewhere. So if you want to be able to use the code lists, this online resource that's driven by the API, so there's the code list API sits behind it, and that makes it available for you in a range of ways that you can use to access that. Okay. At this point, I want to jump back to, give me a second, to the question that George asked me to quickly work in. So just moving on to that. Somebody asked, can I quickly put a diagram together to show how that area works ID would work? And here is my example. So in the middle, you can see there's the area works columns with the attributes. In A-SPEC, there is the table, and it's just a subset of the values for trees, the attributes for trees. And then in A-SPEC, there's a landscape and there's an open space. And the way it's going to work is that there's an area of works ID in all of these, and it relates back to the area of works ID in area of works. And so you will have the same value over here and all of those as you have in the associated area of works. Okay, George, did you want to comment on that one? Is that what you kind of had in mind?
Yep, that's fine. I'll if I need any more, I'll cover it in the wrap up.
Okay. All right. The next I want to touch on is data support. So let me just start my presentation again. So we've started working on developing various tools to help you implement and utilize the A-SPEC range. Now, we've developed schema definitions for Oracle, for SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, all of those, even for MongoDB. Just so in other words, if your IT department or within your company, if you're a developer, if you wanted to build a repository that you can use to store the A-SPEC schema, then there is we have these available. So it's on request. If you could just email, and you'll find we'll be able to provide you with a predefined schema definition that you can just go and run in your own environment. The next one is the QGIS project files. So we've developed generic basic project files for each spec individually. We have got options for validation and for automation built into another set of project files. And then these can be customized per project if people are interested. And we also have, together with that, we provide a range of data validation tools. So these are specifically for QGIS. And if anybody's interested in having similar sort of project files for another environment, just get in touch and we can talk about it. But the way that you will use these is you will open up your QGIS, you will load the project template, and that will create all the schema tables that you need. But with that, it will integrate the code lists, so you can use them as a lookup table. You don't have to manually refer backwards and forwards. It just simplifies the process quite a lot. Now, if I have a bit of time later on, I could possibly show this, but I've only got about a half an hour, so I'm trying to push through. But we can get back to that one. The next slide I want to talk about is the training. So we've been offering training courses, and we initially started with just 2 basic training courses. Very quickly found that sometimes we cover stuff that the A-SPEC people are not really interested in. so we've modified those courses, and we've now got a range of training available. One, a QGIS introduction, a QGIS advanced, and then specifically using QGIS to do data capture. And this is not a course, but this is automation tools that we offer with Python. So if you want to have some automation in your QGIS, we can give you. And then in terms of spec training, George does offer overviews for understanding the specs, something to understand the asset class relationships. I've looked at a lot of data lately and have discovered that very often people don't fully understand the relationships between different asset classes, and so we can talk about that. And then finally, there is a certification program on the cards. And if you want to know more about that, then also get in touch with George on that one. Right. Finally, we've also developed an API for construction image data capture. As we've discussed a little bit earlier on, the specs all require images for all new assets. You should have photographic images for all new assets. It seems like very often or very few are actually being received, and there's difficulty, there's complaints or difficulty in terms of delivering and validating of those images. And also we've seen that there's potential to make life a little bit easier for people. So we've built an image capture web app that provides some validation and certainty in terms of the as-builts, and can also give you a tool with which you can monitor project progress. And finally, we're working on artificial intelligence to help identify the content of an image. Now, I'm going to jump into another bit of a demo. Now, I actually tested this. I tried to test this on my phone. The whole application works is developed for a mobile phone, and it works quite well for that. But if I open this, I can't demo that now live. But if I did, I would be able to, if I look at the image, click over here, and that will, what it does here is it asks me to add an image. If I did that on my phone, that'll turn on the camera, and then will allow me to capture a photo and some data that goes with it. Now, here's an example I did from my phone yesterday. If I can get this thing to load, and notice that there's a little bit of information about where I've captured it. I've removed the location tag, so this bottom bit wouldn't work simply because my address is a bit hard for this. But the moment I wanted to mention, the moment I selected my name as the photographer, it automatically filled in this other information. So I have the ability to store associations. And so if your organization has 3 or 4 people who work in the field, the person just has to pick their name, and it picks the name of the company, puts the date in, and if you wanted to see that's my backyard, which I think is quite pretty and beautiful, with my kangaroos, not actually kangaroos, those are wallabies, over there. And these images that's what I've taken using this application. Now, how this will be usable is that once I've done the data capture, everybody that's got access to that particular project, so including the council, will be able to access the imagery that's associated and make the data links what we will do is we'll automate the data linking. All right, that was a very quick overview for me, and I'm actually short on time, George. I thought I was going to be, I was not going to make it in time. Any questions or comments about?
Gabby,
yes,
maybe
I read. Go for it, George.
I was just going to say, maybe cover off a bit more about how we intend the web service to operate around security and that sort of thing, so that it's a call.
Yep. All right. We are working with a company, and I'll mention their name here. The organization is called Squiz. One of the really good things that they've developed is unique identification worldwide, basically. So if we talk about any of the data elements that's captured and goes through the system, we are able to assign a key or element to that data tuple, if we term I use, that is completely unique. That data tuple becomes part of. If I'm the photographer, then that's my asset. I've taken that photo. I can give other people access to that photo, and that becomes, something that that I control. But I can do that in a way that every time my photo is used by somebody else, it can be set up that there is that I retain the copyright to that photo. Doesn't matter who they are. I can hand that over to another organization, but the copyright, and if and this depends entirely on how people want to do this. If I want to associate a cost with that copyright, or with the photo, or the usage of the photo, I can do so at a very micro level. Through Squiz, we will be able to associate what they call micro invoices. So these are a cent or a half a cent per time that my data has been utilized. And so when other developers are active in a particular area and they want to see what's going on, then hopefully we can build a whole library of images or bits of data that get stored and shared. And if you have participated in that process, eventually everything that you've contributed to the system then becomes something that you can benefit from financially. So there'll be a return back to the surveyor or the developer who's used that data. So it's not just available for the council. Obviously, if the asset is handed over to the council, then council becomes the owner, and that mechanism can work in a variety of different ways. We're not specific about it, but the important thing is that the system will allow the data owner to make their information accessible, but also they will get a small kickback to help maintain and manage that data. George, you think I've covered off enough on that? Did you want to add? You're just so much better at it than I am.
No, you're doing great.
All right. Are there any questions?
Yes, there's a question about how do they access the web service, sign up, cost involved. Do we need authority from our department at council?
All right. All of those. Look, at a technical and a commercial level, if you want to have access, just get in touch with George. or info at GISA, and we will take it from there. We'll set you up with an account, and the cost on this will be, it's going to be per record, but it is, we're at the moment we're talking about a few cents per record. And perhaps for those of you who are interested, let's have a discussion about what will work. We have our ideas, but I would like to get some feedback from people to see what that would be worth for them. That's on the commercials. Permissions from your local council to use. So sorry, my first answer was in terms of this image API. When it comes to the code list API, this one we will make available at an annual cost. At the moment, we are talking about something like $50 a year or something, where you will get access to all of this. We're not 100% clear in terms of that cost, but making use of it, I'm open for discussion. I am looking for anybody who start using it on a beta basis, because we've got a few people who've put up their hand, and we're busy working with them. But I am looking for people who actually would start to implement this in their work environment. So permissions from your IT, well, you need collaboration from your IT department in order to be able to use this. It will make their lives a lot easier, because they will now set up a web service or a web application that can consume the web service, and that will be integrated with either your Esri or your QGIS or your asset management system. And that's fairly straightforward. A lot of applications can consume web services, so the cost per year will be quite minimal. For the next 3 months, I would like to have this available for free, but with people who are seriously wanting to utilize this in their systems, so that we can get it actually in active use. Right.
Good job, Gabby. So just to expand on that, you'll still be able to download the spreadsheets from the website. There'll be no issue about that, and that will be no cost to that. What we're looking at is for people who, for organisations that want to receive a web service and have currency in what the codes are, then they can have a look at trialing the API. And that's the intention.
Yeah, and I was thinking, for consultants, if you're out in the field and you've 4G coverage, if you're wanting to look up a particular code, this could be quite handy for you when you're doing a data capture, if you don't have all of the codes on all your devices. And also, this will help you to stay current. So, you will have the latest codes available on the system, and it's right on your phone.
Nice. Keep talking, Gabby. I've got a couple of minutes. You got 3 more minutes before I take on.
All right.
Any questions?
I can't think of anything else to say. If there's a question, I'd like to take a question. Let me just see this. Okay, I don't. There's no other questions that I can see. George, I think take over.
Okay. Well, I'll be with you in just a moment. I'm just finalising a couple of things that I wanted to show for my wrap up.
Okay.
And then I'll be done.
So I'll carry on with a question or two. Are there any surveyors or developers on the call who think that maybe you'd be interested in looking at this codeless API or the online, not necessarily the API for integration, but the API on that web app that I showed? No takers?
Not yet. We'll work
How
on it,
about
Gabby.
how about people from council? All right.
They're shy.
They're shy, but perhaps I went over it too quickly.
Maybe.
But it's all right.
That's okay.
We'll put an email together with more detail or a demo.
Well, a lot of these people, Gabby, are also going to be on the other sessions.
Yeah.
So so we could get some feedback from them, and we can refine.
Yep.
And so when we do our D-Spec session on Tuesday next week, we could probably cover that off in a bit more detail. Okay.
Yeah, actually, Gabby, there is one question. You mentioned the QGIS projects files. Do you have any similar such files for MapInfo, please?
No, I don't. I didn't think that was that there was a question for, or that there was a need for them. Not in the sense that I didn't know whether people wanted those. I can certainly look at that. Is that John that asked the question?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay, John, I'll get in touch with you. We can talk about it.
Yeah, no probs.
All right, yeah.
Okay, so I'll now take over, Gabby.
That's fine.
Okay. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can. I think
Great.
everyone can.
Thank you, Gabby. Okay, so we're in the last session and everything's gone on time. So and appreciate the feedback so far. So wrap up and where to. So I mentioned that I would. I apologise for the resolution of this. So mismatch with description. I didn't have an example before, but here I have. So where we spoke about the C comment field didn't match up, the description in that didn't match up with the table. So as you can see here, we've got electrical equipment type, and the C comment is the code to use when you don't have a current code that exists in this table. So we don't want you to pick something that's the closest. We want you to identify a new feature, contact council, contact us, so that we can create a new code. But so to be used when a fire protection equipment type is not listed, the new fire protection equipment type is to be listed in the comments field. That's all very well and good for fire protection equipment type. However, this is the electrical equipment type table. So what we're doing is we've gone through this. This is something that I just picked up going through the D-Spec the B-Spec document, and noticed a mismatch with this description with the electrical equipment type table. So these are the kind of things that we're resolving so that there is no ambiguity. You know, the first thing that I would imagine that people look at is what are they talking about? This is the electrical equipment table, and they want us to focus on fire protection. No, we apologise. That's our error, because we didn't put rigor into making sure that all of those comments were addressed. Now this isn't mismatched with description, but I've got the same heading. What I wanted to do is focus on the universal file name. So please ignore that particular heading. What I want you to focus on is the universal file name. We spoke briefly about a request to use the universal file name when making that, when providing the data set. Do not create a name that does not reflect this feature. That makes it difficult to address and to make sure that we've got the right features. So for example, when we receive files, one of the issues that we have is that, well, not an issue, we've got automation driven into, we know it's an area extent file, we're looking for that name in the file name. If it's not called that, we then have to go and rename all the files before we do our validation. And then that creates not only some timeliness around it, but it could create my fat thumb syndrome. And instead of area extent, I may call it area extend. And therefore, there's another issue and more time. So we request that there's some rigor around the universal file name. The area of works identifier. Okay, so there currently isn't an ID in this table, and we're proposing that an ID is created in this table. And that ID is then used in every other table, and I will show you some information about that on the upcoming slide. So as you'll see down the bottom, AOW_ID. It's a text string, 100 characters long. That's what we're proposing is used for the area of works extent table as the ID, and also that ID used in every other table to link the objects that are captured as part of an asset table. So that's the information that that I wanted to show you to complete that. I also spoke about QGIS and GeoPackage. So I've got QGIS open 3.10.7, which is a long-term release. Unfortunately, it has the name Corona. It's just very unfortunate in these times. But so what I'm looking at doing here is to drag across a GeoPackage file. So, oops, I think I need to just exit out of that so that I don't create. So I've got a GeoPackage file which I'm bringing across into QGIS. Everything's bundled up. So what you'll see in a moment is what happens when that gets unbundled. So you get the options to pick the layers that you want. So in this particular instance, so we've got one area of work extent boundary, we've got D-Spec data, we've got O-Spec data, we've got A-SPEC data. We're just talking about the one boundary. Sorry, the one polygon. So I'm going to select a couple of features, and this will put it to the test to see if I've got everything aligned. So it's just loading. Working. We've got the work there. I open the attribute table and I've got the area of work boundary here. This will be interesting to see what area of work extent ID that we've created. Okay. Working. No, my live demo has just not working. Not responding. Don't you hate that? Just when you think you got everything confident. Okay. I'm not going to focus on that. If it comes back up, it will. What I want to get back to is the wrap up. Okay, so we've got the area of work ID. It's a text string, 100 characters. So in the wrap up, what's next and when? The next A-SPEC QGIS course, 1st and 2nd of September. API code list release, November 2020. Gabby, did you like how I put that date in? We hadn't even talked about it being 3 months away. So we're on the same page.
Good for you,
Okay.
George.
Next releases of updates, May 2021, unless. And the unless is, unless there's something that is really going to impact your ability to create the data and verify it. A-SPEC certification. What do we mean by that? Our intention is that by June 3030, we have trialed, we have certified a number of organisations, councils and consultants around not just the process of delivering A-SPEC data that complies with the A-SPEC requirements, but also create a conversation around how the issues are communicated by councils to the consultants and resolved, and how consultants deal with resolution of issues that have been raised to them. So the certification process will actually be a tick to say this council and possibly this individual has a process in place to deal with these issues. The consultant has a process in place that has rigor around it and can verify what the issue is, address it with the client, and then resolve it. So the certification process, there will be a cost to it. We're determining what that cost will be, and it will be renewed either on an annual or biannual basis. That's yet to be determined. We've got this process that we're looking to do with a couple of councils later this year and early next year, and it'll evolve over then. So, so the intention again is to create a communication opportunity to resolve issues, not just throw something back and forward and say, well, I've followed things. It's your interpretation. No, it's your interpretation. It's about how to address those kinds of discrepancies. Yes, more APIs. What do we mean by that? Well, we think that following the implementation of the code list API, we'll start moving the specs to an API model as well. The really valuable aspect is the documents. They really describe what needs to be captured and what needs to be collected and to interpret if pit looks like this, and what do I select? If a building has these balconies and has these, it's 2-story and it's got, a veranda on the ground floor and a balcony on the first floor. How do I show the envelope? The documents will always be valuable for that. The APIs are about delivering a web service to future-proof the delivery mechanism of the specs, particularly when there are updates. And the bigger picture is through a secure network, the clients that use that API service, we will have a copy of their schema that they use within their information system that has the A-SPEC mapped elements to it, so that when there is an incremental update, we can provide them with some advice and some service around how to easily incorporate those changes. So yes, so there's a potential new commercial model that we're looking at there. A-SPEC session Tuesday, 13th of October. That's the wrap up. So in that session, bookings will be open on Friday this week. And in that session, we're asking vendors to, like OpenSpatial, like Ken Tolman Consulting, like One Spatial, and we'll be inviting others to do a brief presentation about the kind of tools that they have, or if they want to update on what's coming up with their tools for A-SPEC tools and that sort of thing, they'll have an opportunity to do that. I've fielded a couple of questions around FME, so One Spatial will be there to talk about it, but Gabby also has significant expertise in that. I've fielded questions about AC/DC and A-SPEC. OpenSpatial will be there, so don't miss the opportunity. If you're thinking about how to automate things, we will be there as a wrap up to look at, okay, what's next? We've done this, how do we then leverage from our investment? The next forum, D-Spec, Tuesday, 25th of August. We'll be covering off some of the material that we did in here so that people who weren't on this get that information, and that will be evident in the agenda. So if you've listened, if you've heard some of it and you want to dial in a little bit later, that's okay. But if you want to dial in and just get a recap on what was discussed today, and then look at, and we'll also be looking at D-Spec specific things, then we'll do that as well. It's now 12:01 and I've gone 1 minute over time. I apologize for that. So my next slide. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for attending our first national online forum. It's been pretty exciting. What I didn't mention is that we've had over 250 registrations across the 6 sessions. That's, I would never have got to get across that number of people just to face-to-face. So really appreciate your attendance, appreciate your contribution, and we would look forward to seeing some of you on the other sessions, and if not, don't hesitate to contact us. Gabby will be ducking off shortly, but I'll be online for the next 15 minutes. If anybody has any questions, comments, feel free to unmute yourself or chat. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.